Okay, so we're joined here today by Kyle Acker. Kyle, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on, Dave. I'm the executive vice president of a company called RiseENT. So we're a group purchasing organization and managed service organization for otolaryngology offices, which is ear, nose, and throat offices. We really focus on helping to build audiology ancillaries within ENT offices. And our parent company, OddConnects, works in the audiology and hearing instrument specialist dispensing space as well. So my history is a little bit different than a lot of people, I think, but I've really come from a background of hearing instrument manufacturing, clinic. I'm actually an industrial hygienist by my original training, which
Okay.
is not cleaning teeth in factories as much as people may think. But it's really around health and safety and things like that. So my background's a little bit different, but that's currently what I'm doing is heading up an organization that helps ear, nose, and throat offices really build great audiology practices that focus on their patients.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you for coming on today. I think this is going to be a great conversation. The reason I wanted to bring Kyle on is because Kyle's been in the hearing care industry for a while now. I think he knows the ins and the outs of it. So we're definitely going to get into some of the technology side. I think some of the ways in which this industry can adapt to sort of our new normal, even as we sort of have things start to open back up, in light of the coronavirus. But before we even get into all that, I would just be curious from your side of things. So you got into this industry, it sounds like pretty early on, and you've been here for a while. So can you share just a little bit of like your journey of how you got into this, where it started? You ended up at Starkey for about 10 years, and then now you're at Rise. I would just love to have you kind of just walk us through that little journey that you've had,
Yeah,
within
I'm
the
happy
field.
to. It's weird is, I've been chatting with a lot of people about my new role and position, and um, I've always felt myself to be like the kid in the industry, and it's weird to hear that change over time. Like there's young people in our industry like you, Dave, that are coming and doing great things, and I talk to these new audiologists that are fresh out of school. They're 25, 26 years old. I talk to these new reps that are at the hearing companies and everything, and it's I'm having like this existential moment in my career right now. It's the most bizarre thing, but
That's
I guess they
hilarious.
call this a midlife crisis. I'm only 39, but holy cow! Hopefully I live longer than double 39. But anyway, to get back to your question, yeah. So I grew up down by where you're based.
Yep.
So I grew up in Southern Illinois. I grew up on the other side of the river from you, from St. Louis. So we
Fellow
always
Cards
joke that
fan.
yeah, absolutely. We always joke that it was the communist East Side, kind of like in Germany and Berlin, right?
Yeah.
So I grew up in Southern Illinois, and for those of you that don't know the area, if you go about 15 miles east of St. Louis, so you have the Mississippi River, you go through East St. Louis, not much left there, but you go 15, 20 miles east and it's farm country. So
Yeah.
I grew up in the country in a little town called New Baden, Illinois, and went to a small high school. There were 97 people in my graduating class. And
Wow.
I had the benefit of, I always kind of knew that I wanted to do patient care. And I am absolutely terrified of giving and taking blood.
Yeah.
So I knew being a physician was not going to work out well. So I had the benefit as a high school project of being you had to go out and do a job shadow as a senior project in high school. And most of the kids that I went to high school with went and milked cows and fed pigs and worked on a tractor. And I went to the local pharmacy and I got really interested in being a pharmacist. So I applied, and luckily my grades were good in high school, even from this little college or from this little high school, and got into Purdue University to be a pharmacist. So I started at Purdue. I was woefully underprepared to go to a Big Ten college from New Baden, Illinois, and West Glen High School, which is now 5-6 times its size now as the metro continues to grow.
Mm-hmm.
But did do real hot in college right away. Decided I didn't want to count by fives for the rest of my life as a pharmacist. I was looking for something that would give me a little bit more direct patient care. So I met a really great advisor at Purdue after I decided to transition out of pharmacy, or pharmacy decided to transition me out. We'll let them decide what the truth is there. But I had a great advisor named Dave Tate, who to this day I still speak to him. And he said, you've got all this really great science background from doing, 2 years of pre-pharmacy, they called it at the time. Mm-hmm. There's this really easy transfer degree for you. And I said, okay, less college, easy transfer, something I might like, tell me about it. And it happened to be in health sciences at Purdue in a program called industrial hygiene, which is focused around health and safety, like I told you before. And and so I transferred into that. It was housed in health sciences, which was at the time was its own school at Purdue. But it sat between nursing, engineering, and liberal arts almost. Okay. So I took classes in civil engineering, and I took classes in nuclear pharmacy, and I took all just these random classes. So I learned a lot about toxicity and mm-hmm. and the body and ergonomics and working with the worker. And so I did a couple really awesome internships. One of them was at a semiconductor factory in Florida, Palm Bay, Florida, okay. for a company called Intersil. So if you remember, do you remember the old like blue box Linksys routers, the first wireless routers, right? Mm-hmm. The blue and black ones. So Intersil was a spinoff of Harris Technologies, which is a huge governmental contractor. They make communication satellites and guidance systems for missiles, and they're like a Raytheon or a General Dynamics type company. And so they made the original chips that went in the Linksys routers. So I worked there for a while and did some chemical exposure assessment, because they use really nasty chemicals when they're making silicon wafers to turn into chips and stuff like that. And then the next internship I did was with Eli Lilly, a company they have called Elanco. Okay. So Elanco makes animal products. So they make feeds for animals that have antibiotics and stuff in them, which is totally not cool these days. But they were kind of one of the first ones that did that. And Eli Lilly is a great company in the state of Indiana. And they're actually working on a COVID vaccine right now and making really good progress. But one of the things when you're making these huge vats of animal feed is that these machines that shake down all the antibiotics and stuff into the food are super loud. Yeah. And so they had me do, as part of an industrial hygiene externship, they had me do a hearing conservation program for the factory. And that's where I first started learning about hearing in depth. Interesting. So my background in audiology and hearing aids and all that stuff, totally bizarre, right? Totally different. So anyway, got interested in hearing, went to graduate school to be an audiologist. As part of that, I helped run a research lab for Dr. King Chung, who's now at Northern Illinois. We did some of the first research around using directional microphone technology in cochlear implants, which now is commonplace, using noise reduction technology in cochlear implants. So mm-hmm. I learned so much from her. She's awesome. She's a brilliant researcher. And I think Purdue really lost somebody great when she transferred over to NIU to start her lab there. But I learned a lot about the scientific process and everything there. So graduated, became a clinician at the American Institute of Balance. So I started doing a lot of vestibular stuff, but still had a passion for hearing technology. Did clinic for about 3.5 years, and then was picked up by Starkey Hearing Technologies. So I was a regional trainer at Starkey. So I used to do all the trainings on the technology and stuff. Then I was promoted after 7 or 8 months to manage the education and training team there. And then I made a transition over into sales when the sales team was really looking for somebody that had some strong technical skill to help build our, sales talk tracks and things like that. And then in January, I made the transition over to start this new company, RiseENT. So it's been a long, crazy ride. I always tell new audiologists, it's like, you want to do something, find it, you can do it. I mean,
I love that though. I love people that have these sort of like meandering roads that lead them here. And you've had this like interesting combination of like, you were working at like a semiconductor company, which obviously has led you to being so knowledgeable about, the innovation that's happening within the hearing aids. You've had this whole aspect of the hearing conservation side. I mean, I think that I had a conversation with Deanne Rudden and Brian Urban not long ago where Deanne mentioned that she's been working with like industrial workforces. And I continue to think that I'm like, there's so much opportunity for this profession to just better make, different types of work settings aware of the need for hearing conservation so that you get ahead of this whole problem. And so I just think that that's so interesting, like this background that's culminated into, your life experience and how they've all sort of come together in such a unique way. And so you said something interesting at the beginning of this, like you were like, well, I feel like I'm going through a midlife crisis and there's this wave of people. And I just got to say that, for the audience here, the reason that I've gotten to know Kyle over the years is that he did a really good job when I was first starting out with the blog of like, I met him at a conference and he supported me and he was like, I'm reading your blog. And that actually really went a long way of helping me to like have confidence and like, okay, so there are some people that are reading this. And I just think it's important that for anybody that's young and starting out right now, there are a lot of people that were in your shoes 10 years ago, however many years ago, where they are more than happy to help you out and lift you up. And I think that Kyle's a good testament of that. And it's cool that we're able to have this conversation now that we've kind of gotten to know each other. And I just think it's cool how it's all kind of come full circle like that.
Yeah. And, it's, man, I remember when you first started writing and stuff and it was great from the beginning.
Thanks.
And just tons of potential. But I think one of the things that all of us realize at the very beginning is that sometimes you have to read through some of the marketing speak and you have to understand the underlying technology to truly be able to understand it and explain it to others around you. And so I think that may have been what some of my initial guidance was when you and I first started talking, is that, it doesn't really work like that.
It's true.
It sounds good, but understanding the underlying technology. And it's funny you say that, a lot of people have started looking to my Facebook posts, I started writing about COVID and how it's affecting the United States and a lot of people have, and I was doing it just for fun. Like I need to digest data and understand
like cathartic.
it. Yeah. For me to feel comfortable with it. And so I started writing some things down back in late February, early March, when COVID really started taking off. And so a lot of people have started relying on that now for their information. But one of the things that I always caution others, and I will always, is that, look, anybody is just one source of information for you, and you need to be a conscious consumer of data and a conscious consumer of information. It's important that you come to your own decisions on what is real and what is not. So that's kind of the initial discussions that you and I had. What is it? It's probably been 5-6 years ago now. and look how well it served you. So
Thanks, man.
I'll
I
pat
appreciate
myself
it.
on the back for that piece of advice. Yeah.
Well, it's
Don't
cool.
listen to me. I'm
Yeah,
telling
right.
you. Yeah.
Well, it's
So
cool though. It's cool that we can that I've gotten to build the rapport with you to where it's like, all right, now let's have a conversation over a podcast. And I just think it speaks to this idea that, going off of what you were saying about writing about COVID is like, I felt really passionate when I first started writing about this, about a subset of the whole industry, which was the technology side. Like I was really, really passionate about it. And I felt like this desire where I was like, I need to put this into writing and I need to make this public. And I didn't honestly, initially, it wasn't that big of a deal to me, like how many people were reading it, because it was just like, I felt like it was just my own process of thinking through things. And it's crazy of like how one step leads into the next. And then before you know it, you're like, this is kind of becoming like a thing that I'm doing routinely. And so going off of what you were saying with COVID, obviously you've been following this really closely. Quick barometer check. Here we are. We're recording this on, what is it, May 6th. What's your general sense right now with the pandemic? I mean, we don't need to go like too deep into it, but are you what's your general gist of where we stand right now as somebody that's been following this as close as you have?
it feels like to me that we're right in the middle of it. It's kind of what it feels like to me.
Yeah.
And my concern is so if you look at infection rate and death rate, unfortunately, and if you look at mortality rates, so how many new cases do we see a day?
Mm-hmm.
How many new deaths do we see a day? And what percentage of those that test positive die, right? And total population as well. It seems like there has been a plateau. My concern is how long does the plateau last? So I was hoping that by next week, so I've kind of been saying, I feel like the second week of May is the turning point on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that since early April.
Wow.
I'm concerned that we haven't started to see a decline.
Yeah.
So when we see a couple days of downward trending of new cases, it then starts to pick up again. So we're getting kind of this sinusoidal wave, which concerns me a little bit, because the hope was that things would start, in most other countries, what you've seen is that it's come up and it's peaked and then it's started to trail off a bit in new cases and in total cases. So part of the reason why we're seeing a plateau rather than a decline is that I don't think our data sources are doing a really awesome job right now of tracking people that have fully recovered. So one of the ways that you see a total cases decline is, well, if a bunch of people get better, then you deduct that number from the numerator, right?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So if we're not following up on people that get better super well, then it's kind of hard to see total cases decline. But it's also that, as a country, we've gotten really tired of social distancing and all the lockdowns, and not just tired of it. I mean, people are truly suffering. There's, I just released an article this morning. Starkey was nice enough to pick it up on their blog about how important it is that people with hearing impairment wear their hearing aids all the time, even when they're at home, because you need to keep your brain activated. Yeah. Alerts and things like that are important. But it concerns me that we're getting tired of our own medicine a little bit. And that, you see some states like Georgia and Tennessee go back to what's almost normal. Florida has started to do that as well. One of my friends down in the West Coast beaches in Florida, they went out to a restaurant last night, and the only requirement at the restaurant can be at 25% normal capacity, and they had to separate out the table. This is a highly infectious virus. Right. I mean, it spreads like the measles. Only the measles we now have a vaccine for. We don't have one for COVID, for coronavirus. So So it concerns me a little bit that our cases are not declining. And I think that for us to really recover, that we need to see that. And that was outlined by the president in his reopening guidelines. And it seems like we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So
Yeah.
it concerns me a bit, Dave.
So now tying this back to our industry, right? I think that there's been a lot of, obviously, just like every business out there, I think that there's been this pent up demand of, when can we open and how do we actually go about doing that? I think that one of the interesting things that's happened with this, and I don't mean that to make light of the situation, but interesting from the standpoint of, looking at the longer term picture here is, I've seen people term this as like the great accelerant, meaning that a lot of the existing technologies that were already sort of like undergoing their own maturation, telehealth, things such as that, remote work in general, these things were progressing steadily. And it appeared as if like down the line, we would have a future where telehealth became the new normal. And it's like, I've seen a number of different quotes, like Satya Nadella over at Microsoft. He said that we've seen more transformation in the last 2 months than we would have expected in the next 3 years. So it's this great acceleration of these pre-existing trends. And one of them, obviously, that applies to this industry is telehealth and just the notion of conducting remote services for your patients. And it seems like this March, April window in particular was a really good time for people to wrap their heads around what this might look like. And what I wonder is that, and this is sort of like a loaded question because it includes the notion of the broad context of the whole coronavirus. But as we start to reopen practices again and people start to return to sort of the old standard of care, right? Like just like what they had been doing pre-virus. I wonder if the telehealth and the understanding that there's a real need to implement this, at least to offer it, I think, as an alternative, in particularly given the patient demographic that tends to be the one that's being seen, that's also the most at risk for this virus, it seems, older adults, maybe with pre-existing conditions. My question to you is, do you think that it's like we've, made a little bit of progress on this thing that's, I think, going to be really important to the future of this industry? Do you think that people are now just going to maybe either forego that, or are they going to look at this and say, well, okay, I'll put that on the back burner and not really attend to it, when, in my opinion, I think this is still the time that you need to emphasize this aspect of your business to at least make it viable enough to where if you do have a patient that wants to come see you or at least visit with you, but they aren't comfortable with seeing you in person, that you can still service that person. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah. Boy, you're right. That is a loaded question. So,
Yeah.
so
Unravel that one.
right. So COVID is just a good excuse to try telehealth.
Yeah.
And so just because this virus is affecting a lot more people doesn't mean that every single day in a COVID-free world we don't have viruses that can negatively affect the livelihood and health of our target patient demographic, right? So my hope is that everybody got to practice really hard on
Yeah.
telehealth during this crisis, because it's been mandated and mandatory that they use this technology to see their patients. Now, I always tell, and I've written a bit about this, and I always tell our members and customers that whoever offers the best service and experience to the consumer will win. To this day, and having been a clinician, I don't believe that there's an appropriate replacement for face-to-face contact when working with our current technology in the hearing space with our hearing impaired patients.
Yeah.
telehealth, while it's a great solution to help us with some things that we need to do in current times and for at-risk populations in the future, it's just not, it's not the same as being face-to-face with someone. So if you think about working with someone with a hearing impairment, our patient demographic is typically older. Even though our patient demographic is getting better at technology, they're still not great at it in general. I know that's a gross stereotype and generalization. As a matter of fact, my 87-year-old grandmother, my dad just bought her an iPad because she couldn't see her grandkids or great grandkids. Dad bought her an iPad with the LTE because she didn't have internet at her house. And now she can FaceTime with all of us, and she's good at it. So, it's not necessary to think that an aging population can't learn. It's just in general, they're not as savvy as, say, the innovators, right?
Sure.
On top of that, we have to remember that communication challenges are already present in our patient population, and adding an extra layer on top of that makes it difficult, right? So you've got a big chunk. So if we look at the bell curve of patients from the innovators to the laggards, and the people in the middle are kind of your target, right? I think that telehealth is still a little bit ahead of its time. Okay. But like I started with, I believe that clinics that focus on the consumer, the needs of the consumer, and make care as convenient for everyone will do the best, right? So you've got this middle group of patients that probably aren't ready for full-on telehealth, but can do some small things. And then you've got this group of innovators, the younger folks with hearing loss, the more tech-savvy folks with hearing loss that absolutely love that. So, and as the technology curve catches up and the patient population catches up to the technology, then they will embrace it more. So, should you pick up telehealth right now to avoid catching a virus and then put it down later? Absolutely not. Because there are patients that you have that their lives are challenging and difficult and busy, and seeing them for follow-up visits could absolutely be well done via telehealth. Do I think that every single patient can be seen or should be seen with telehealth? Not today. But now's a really good time for you to learn how to do those things, incorporate it with the patients that would value that service. And then eventually, as the technology gets easier, the patient population gets more savvy at using the technology, then it becomes a larger portion of your practice possibly. And then that allows us to overcome our accessibility issues and our labor shortage issues. The reality is that 1 in 5 Americans get treated for hearing loss with amplification. And there's a number of factors that play into that, but accessibility could potentially be one of those, and ease of accessibility, meaning how quickly can we get to those folks. So telehealth has a promising future. Is because of COVID, is audiology and dispensing going to turn into a telehealth field? I don't think so.
No, I think that you painted that really accurately. I think you're right. I think that it's something that it will, down the line, you're right. I think that it will appeal to a broader base of people, particularly like you mentioned, as the technology gap. I'm thinking back to a slide that I have in one of my presentations where, to your point, older adults, typically it's not that they're like tech illiterate or they inherently struggle with this. It's just that they are on the further end of the adoption curve. And that if you look at a lot of the pre-existing trends, like something like internet usage or social media adoption, the fastest growing cohort tends to usually be 65 plus. Granted, because they have a smaller base, but that they do eventually really adopt it. And I think like your anecdotal point about like, you give grandma an iPad and you show her how to work it, and it's actually something that they'll probably pick up in time. And so I think that you make a really good point there, though, that is like, this is still a good time, I think, uh, to teach yourself this, and at least give it a chance that it might appeal to some people, so that you're prepared as time goes on to make it more available, to a wider set of people. So I think that's probably the right approach here, is that ultimately, uh, face-to-face consultations, and just especially given the nature of this type of consultation, where there is usually a language, or a communication barrier, given the nature of why they're coming to see you, because they have hearing loss. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think where I want to go with this now is, you mentioned, one in five Americans have hearing loss. And, this, it's something that I think, has flown under the radar a little bit with the general population, in terms of their knowledge of just how widespread of a problem this is. And you look at some of the new comorbidity data that's been coming out around cognitive decline, and just the wide variety of different things that are associated with, isolation, and which is usually a byproduct, or sometimes can be a byproduct of the lack of being able to hear people and being able to communicate, and just the ability to communicate depreciating to the point where you start to withdraw. And so in my eyes, I look at this problem as, there's kind of multiple things that are going on right now. So you have, it's a widespread thing that is, we need to figure out a way to really combat this spread of hearing loss, and all the comorbidities that are associated with it. But hearing aids, for a really long time, in hearing aids as the primary method of solving and combating this, has sat around a penetration rate of roughly 20 to 25%.
Mm-hmm.
And so a big reason why I started Future Ear in this whole thing was that, I feel as if one piece of the puzzle that is promising, that I feel, and I think that, maybe, some of your experience would, shed a light on this too, is that the technology side of things is really rapidly advancing now. And I think it started with Bluetooth, and actually it probably goes back before Bluetooth, but Bluetooth was a catalyst, because it really tethered the hearing aid to the smartphone, and the smartphone's computing power, and the processing, and the whole app economy. And I just feel as if, really, since I've been in this industry about 5 years now, it's like every single year we see this dramatic jump, and so, I feel as if one way that maybe we're going to really combat this and get more usage is that these devices are ultimately going to be able to do much more than what the preconceived notion of a hearing aid was, right?
Mm-hmm.
It used to just be a single function device that was an amplification tool. And in a weird way, I think the coronavirus highlights just the type of potential, I think, that hearing aids in the future could really, be a part of, which is like, maybe it's going to be part of a diagnostic system, an early detection system, using biometric data, that kind of thing, or just notification system, some of the different things that, are being introduced today that can help to, provide actionable insight gleaned from the data that the hearing aid is capturing, and just like the different metrics that it's capturing, and conveying that to different parties that are tied to the primary user. And where I'm going with this whole thing is, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this idea of, do you feel as if what is happening on the tech side, obviously there's a major role that the provider is going to play into this as well, but do you see that we kind of are reaching like this momentum on the technology side that's maybe going to, in part, give rise to a much, much more compelling type of device that is more multifunctional? It can support lots of different things that all sort of play into, I think, this patient demographic that would appeal to them when it's broader than just, it can help you to hear better. If maybe part of the breakdown in terms of why the penetration rate is as low as it is that the perceived value proposition is, maybe fundamentally altering right now.
Right. And maybe it's not enough for the consumer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I often tell audiologists and hearing instrument specialists that they command the most valuable piece of real estate on the body.
Yep.
And they don't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at the ear, and my colleague and friend Dave Fabry has said that the ear is the new wrist,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I've heard him say that. Yeah.
So yeah, and he couldn't be any more correct. So when we look at biometric tracking today of human health, you see it focused around the wrist. And so your Apple Watch, Fitbit, Garmin, whatever it is that you use is what we're using today for biometric information. Heart rate, there's some new technology that suggests SpO2 can be pulled using some advanced sensors similar to what heart rate uses. Step counts, activity, movement, caloric, estimated caloric burn, all those different things, right? In a study that was done at Starkey, and when I worked at Starkey, I was lucky enough to be able to write on this, is that there's an awful lot of noise that comes from putting your biometric tracker on your wrist. It's an appendage. There's no better place on the body to pull biometric information than the ear.
Yeah.
Your ears are bilateral, so you have two of them. It's easy to do noise reduction in data sets when you have two data sources. So it's very easy to say, look, if we detect it very simply, if we detected a step on left side, didn't detect one on the right side, really we have an arc, right? Because you should see a step register because it's on the midline in both ears. So very basic like that. It's great for error detection and artifact detection. But then you start thinking, what communication gateway to the brain? Well, it's the ear, right? So how we get information into our brain for two senses that are most important for communication is visually and auditorily. So you have this great gateway of information processing directly into the brain with the ear. Some other things that are really great, we can pull heart rate from the ear. The ear is very vascular, so it's while it's not easy, you can pull information like heart rate, SpO2, heart rate recovery, all those different things. There are some studies, and I've given talks about this at some academy meetings. There are some really strong studies that show micro shifts in temperature are excellent precursor indicators of potential disease. So there's a few studies done by Johns Hopkins that show that there are micro fluctuations in temperature prior to acquiring the full-blown flu. And as we know, and we've heard this referred to as a million times in the age of COVID, that the flu is, the most deadly virus that's out there, which isn't true. COVID actually much more deadly, but the flu kills a lot of people every year. And if we can build up people's immune system prior to getting a full-blown flu attack that leads to pneumonia, which leads to damage to the alveoli in the lungs, which then leads to cardiopulmonary issues. If we can cut that off at the pass and bump up people's immune system and give the immune system a chance to fight it because we detected a micro fluctuation in temperature 5 days before a full-blown flu attack, we could save hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives a year. And it's the best place to take somebody's temperature, other than another orifice that's south of it, is in their ear canal, right? So you start to look at, plus, you can look at tympanic reflexes, you can look at all of these different things. we can do near field recordings of brain function from the ear. So you look, what better opportunity in the world do we have to make people healthier with technology than to use the ear? So great real estate spot. And it is my belief that because of that convergence of biometrics that occur at ear level, that there's no better place to do that. So now we have the best real estate. Now, how do we combine the technology? Now, the technology lags, unfortunately. There's two major factors that make it difficult to create a Fitbit in your ear that's super effective. And those two factors are microelectronics. So how do we get the packaging small enough? Because nobody, and we've seen this, right? Nobody wants to wear these big hunking things on their ear that fall off and they're uncomfortable and everything like that. And the hearing industry has done a really great job of miniaturizing all of this stuff. But that comes at cost, right? So while a current hearing aid is 100 times more powerful in processing than the Apollo guidance computer, it still lags behind what an iPhone or an Apple Watch or even your MacBook could process. And it does that to lead to the second problem that we have in hearing, which is power. So battery density, so power density in batteries is still not to a point where you can get really high processing levels and processing from multiple sensors. So things that we're talking about, heart rate, blood pressure, temperature, and process sound, and all those things, where you can get a full 16 to 20 hour use stay off of a really small battery. Now, there are a couple hearing aid manufacturers that are bleeding edge on this, and they're doing a really good job with some custom instruments that do a lot. But the reality is today is that they're offloading a lot of their true processing to, a secondary device, phone or an Apple Watch or something like that, right? Most of the sound processing is occurring at the ear level, but if you talk about the health tracking and data and things like that, that's all being communicated to the device, which is then uploading that information even to the cloud to be processed, with machine learning, artificial intelligence, and done at the cloud level. So the problems we have today are microelectronic packaging and battery. As soon as those two things are solved, which easy, right? I mean,
easy.
You fix that tomorrow. As soon as those things are solved, there is no reason why every human being on the planet wouldn't use their ear level for biometric tracking. I mean, don't get me wrong, watches are a fashion item. So watches are never going away. And I know you talk a lot and interact a lot with the folks in the voice community. So I agree with you wholeheartely that we, rather than using manual input devices like keyboards, mice, fingers, stuff like that, that we'll use our voice, and even, maybe 50, 100 years from now, we'll use our thoughts to drive user input. But there's really no reason why we would keep biometrics at the wrist when we've got this excellent gateway for communication, biometric information, everything else that can happen at the ear level. And you're spot on to believe that that's the place that this all is going to go.
So I think what's interesting about what you said, I think, first of all, I love that framing, and I that's been a mission of mine too, is like, I try to make it as apparent as possible that, this industry this is the best real estate, and it's really apparent because look at what the major tech companies are doing. It's by no mistake that Apple hit a home run with AirPods. I think
all of the money, right?
Well, it's like, I think exactly. And I think that you look at where the major tech players are positioning, they're jockeying for right now, whether it be on the interface of the future. I think that they're looking toward, and I should caveat that I don't necessarily think that voice is like going to be the ultimate preeminent, like the end all be all. I think it's going to be a bigger part of the puzzle. And I think AR, VR, I think these different other emerging technologies, I think they're all going to be part of this thing. And, but I think that, what's so interesting to me is that this industry, this hearing aid industry, this little medical subset, is playing. It's a huge beneficiary of what trillion-dollar companies, what their R&D departments are doing, and I think that in so many ways, and this is just a lot of this is just from me personally, and I know you're a fellow tech geek. It's so freaking cool that this is happening to like that we're a part of this, that there's this giant tidal wave that is forming right now and we're on it. We're getting to surf this. And I fully agree with you that there is no better time to be an expert in this particular part of the body. And I think that like one of the messages that I've really been trying to hammer home is this idea that every audiologist out there is an expert in the ear and an expert in treating hearing loss. And I think that there are new opportunities that are starting to arise where you can continue to further your expertise. And in a world full of OTC and all of these things that we hear about, these sort of existential threats to the industry and to the profession, I can't help but think that they're insignificant in light of how much expertise you can gather around the biometric side, understanding the voice interface side, understanding, how this technology can ultimately create a better experience. And I go back to the Simon Sinek, what is your why? And I feel like if a lot of audiologists were asked that, I think that they would probably land on something that's around like, I want to improve my patient's quality of life.
Right.
And I think these types of new use cases all tie into that because there are new ways that you can increase the quality of life. And going back to what I was saying before about, the value proposition, I think that it's like you're basically taking the current value proposition that you've been given as a professional, and you're now just injecting lots and lots and lots of basically free new value in some capacity, particularly around, the fact that you can now podcast endlessly. You can listen to audiobooks. You can access the audio internet. These are content tools in many ways, and they're going to soon become biometric monitors as well. And so I look at this as like, what better of a time to be in the position that you're in and look at it through the lens of that, where you might have a patient who is 80 with comorbidities that's completely unaware of the type of biometric monitoring that can be done with this. And you have the opportunity to present that use case to them so that, of course, the main reason why most of these people are coming in to see a provider today is because they want to hear better. But if you can ultimately enhance the real true reason why they're coming to see you, I want to improve my quality of life. Right. I just think that it's such an awesome position to be in because there really is from somebody that's been reading a lot of the tea leaves and looking at what's coming based on what's happening in the consumer space, what's happening internationally right now. Wearable technology, and particularly ear-worn wearable technology, has some really, really exciting applications and use cases that are seemingly not that far away. Obviously, you're right. The battery constraints are going to be a big deal. I hope that through some of the different ways in which the processors and the DSP chips can preserve power and better utilize the limited power that it has, because the battery itself is really tough to innovate on. Although you're right, there are some interesting things that are happening in this industry. And then also, to your point, you have these are like the smallest wearable devices out there, but yet
hearing aids were the first wearables.
They're the OG and they're the most sophisticated.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is just this last year you had Valencell and Sunyan. They created the first PPG sensor. That's the photoplasmatic optical sensor that can capture a heart rate. that was small enough to fit on a receiver in the canal hearing aid. So like we are having like landmark moments happening right now that in 10 years we'll look back on in the same way that we look back on the first made for iPhone hearing aid. We'll look back on the first hearing aid that had a embedded, optical laser-based sensor that's capable of capturing these things. And you look at like the first made for iPhone hearing aid is night and day difference between the types of hearing aids that are coming onto the market today. And it's a standardization of the technology. Everything is now Bluetooth enabled, and you're seeing there's like, it's taken a while, but now you have the Android side of things catching up too. So that's just a really long-winded way of saying that I see there being so much awesome technology sort of that's like happening and percolating right now. And I feel as if that's not getting enough attention, to counter the narrative of, we as an industry are, and I know that maybe this is part of like just people inherently, like if it bleeds, it leads. People are really focused on the scary, right. But I do think that there is a whole lot to be excited about what's on the forefront right now. And it kind of ties into this whole narrative around telehealth too, which is that you can shy away from it. You can just, turn your back on it. But the fact of the matter is that it's real. It might not be something that's totally pervasive quite yet, but it's the writings on the wall. And you have the opportunity now to really ingrain yourself with how this works and how you feel as if you could implement it. Because to your point, it might not make sense for a lot of the people that you feel need to have that face-to-face consultation, but there are probably some people that this type of stuff would appeal to.
Yeah, for sure. And, in my career, I've had the opportunity to visit a lot with people in Silicon Valley and in the tech centers of the world. And one of the things that remains interesting to me, I've historically gone to CES and TechCrunch and a number of other big tech conferences where you see the bleeding edge technology, and you see kind of where it's a good opportunity to be a trend spotter for the future of tech, and voice first has certainly been a big leader. Ear worn technology has been a big leader, AR, VR, all those different things. And what's funny is that, and I'm going to catch hell for saying this, Silicon Valley gets hearing wrong so much.
Yeah.
They look at the technology that companies like Starkey and Sonova and Demont and WS Audiology and GN create, and they say, oh, well, we can do that. That's easy peasy, no problem. We'll have something out to you in 3 weeks, and you start to talk to some of these folks, and they start to realize what these devices do and how they work, right? So the I've got my AirPod Pros. The battery life is what, maybe 3 hours.
Yeah,
I mean, if
3-4 hours.
I'm lucky.
If we're talking on the phone, yeah.
Right. Actively using them, right? You look at, I feel like my Bose headphones, I'm replacing the, AAA battery in those about once every other day. And then you look at the hearing space, and, our patients are wearing devices 18 hours a day. They recharge them once a day or change the battery in them every 7 to 10 days. They're biocompatible. So when they stick them in their ears, they don't get hot spots. They don't get sores. They wear them comfortably, so much so that many of our patients end up in the shower by accident with them on because they forget they're on. They are transparent. Apple released the new AirPods with transparency mode, and you'd swear it was the second coming of Jesus.
I know.
They released that. RIC devices had audio transparency essentially built right into them since Resound Air was released in the mid 2000s. So you talk to these tech folks, and I've had conversations with some of the, some of the really amazing people, and you start explaining to them what it means to have to wear a biocompatible device for 18 hours a day because your communication is dependent on it.
Mm-hmm.
And they start to cycle back the wheels a little bit.
Yeah.
They lean back a little bit and they say, oh well, maybe it'll take us 5 to 6 weeks instead of 2 to
Right.
3 weeks to develop that technology. And
Mm-hmm.
you wish them well and you pat them on the head and but it's really true. Hearing aids were the first wearables. I joke with my colleagues that hearing aids created the first augmented reality.
They really did.
I mean, you're augmenting your hearing loss with amplification, while not attempting. And modern technology is much better at this now, at not running over the top of the things where you don't need to augment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it, when some of the first hearables started coming out in wearable technology space, I was one of the first 50 backers for Bragi, for
Yeah.
example. I caught it on Kickstarter. I'm like, if they can do half of what they're saying, then this is really a game changer. They actually did, and I was a little disappointed that that the technology didn't take off like I thought it would.
Mm-hmm.
But hearing is hard, and wearing a device in your ear is difficult, and so there's this big gap right now between hearable AirPod headphone
Yeah.
and a hearing aid that's worn all day long because it's required for communication. There's still a huge gap
Yep.
between these two things. And what I'd like to see is, because there are so many people, 15% of adults in the United States have hearing loss, because there's such this broad-based need for amplification and treating hearing loss, and there's so many negative things that can happen in your life if you don't treat hearing loss, that I would
Mm-hmm.
love to see this curve I'd love to see it jumped, right?
Yeah.
There's this huge chasm right now between consumer electronic technology and hearing technology. And I'd love to see more of the people that are in this doing this. And I'd love to see people do that through someone that can help guide them down that path to get the best outcomes. And it's my belief that will be needed for a long-term future, because the technology and the system is complicated, and picking the right system and picking the right solution for that person it requires expertise.
I cannot agree more with you, and I think that is the bull argument for this profession. I think that there is, in my mind, undoubtedly going to be a rise in the complexity of the system, if you will. I think that's a really good way to think about it, is that these are going to increasingly become more system-based type things, whether it be one piece of hardware, but a system of software, or maybe it's just various hardware devices. But I think that this is where the real opportunity, I think, is going to lie across like the next 10 years, is going to be, for the audiologists to be just as well versed as they are in the academic and the true the field of audiology, but also increasingly in the technology, so that you can guide people, to your point, through understanding, in the same way that they do today, understanding what their needs are, but having a really good depth of what's available to them, and being able to piecemeal a solution specific to what that person needs. Because I think that that's where this is going, where you have a lot of really, really cool, exciting opportunities. And it's going to be up to the provider, I think, to really configure that system for their patient, to say, here are the different aspects of what we can provide you with, both through the technology, through the way that you wear the technology, all of those different things. I just think it's an exciting opportunity ultimately for this profession.
Yeah, and the way that that gets done might change, and
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. Like, what if, what if the audiologist did the thing that they're best at, which is diagnosing hearing loss, recommending the best solution for that, and helping in the rehabilitative process,
Mm-hmm.
but mostly just kind of that front end. And then there was somebody else in your office that handled the Geek Squad type stuff, right? So the way I see this, and I've been making these recommendations to our members in Odd Connects and RiseENT, is that, focus on what you're best at.
Yep.
You are best um, at diagnosing and treating hearing loss. Maybe, your 22-year-old son is the best person to have in your office to help with the technology side of things.
Totally.
So just the basic stuff. So, you think about it this way. There's an analogy that I look at here, is that you've got an orthopedic surgeon and you have a physical therapist,
Yeah.
right? So the orthopedic surgeon diagnoses that you have a broken knee, and they say, this is the best knee replacement for this type of broken knee. And then they do the surgery and they take out the broken knee and put in a better bionic knee.
Mm-hmm.
And then they follow up a couple weeks later and they make sure that you don't have any infection, and they make sure that the knee piece is working the way it should, and that it's flexing appropriately, and that it's straight, and what they did was good.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do? They send you the physical therapist to begin your rehabilitative process to use that piece, right? So why is it that, the person that's involved with the selection, diagnosis, implantation, whatever, of the technology piece that they use in audiology is kind of the start to finish person, and it doesn't allow them to focus on what they're best at.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd love to see some shift a little bit. It doesn't make sense, and I know I'm talking about the medical economics now, but it doesn't make sense for us to pay a doctor of audiology to troubleshoot Bluetooth all day long.
Yep.
I mean, it just doesn't. It doesn't make sense. Like, the audiologist is best at diagnosing hearing loss, recommending the best solution, and convincing somebody to make a step towards better hearing, right? The consultative approach to hearing management. It doesn't make sense to take somebody that's a doctor of audiology and then turn them into Best Buy's Geek Squad. It just doesn't. So put the people in the roles that are best at addressing the patient's needs. And I hope that we see our profession shift in that direction in a positive way.
Yeah, no, I love that analogy. I've I've used the analogy before. I think I like your analogy better, the orthopedic surgeon and the physical therapist. I know I've kicked around the idea before where it's sort of like, along the same vein, you go to and you see the dentist, and you have the hygienist that, spends the bulk of the time with you cleaning your teeth, and the dentist comes in and they provide sort of that expert opinion. I think, to your point, ultimately what we're getting at is this idea that the audiologist's time is really valuable. And I think it makes a whole lot more sense to maximize the amount of time. And we're probably, as an industry, going to have to get really creative with this, particularly if, the gross margins decline, as the products will surely start to sort of depreciate in the cost. And so I think that it's going to become more of a service-oriented profession where you have to figure out a way to unbundle your time and charge for your time in as effective way as possible. And I think that, again, going off of this, that it's not as if there's like a shortage of need. There's no demand shortage around this. And in fact, going back, kind of bringing this whole thing full circle, 1 in 5 Americans, have hearing loss. And I think that number is only going to grow because of the, fact that a lot of us have been listening to loud music for extended periods of time for a while. And so you have this growing sort of crisis that's unfolding, but you also have a lot of new tools available to you. And I think that these are going to be types of tools that you can harness, whether it be different types of technology that might really appeal to different subsets of your overall potential patient group, but also getting creative with how, like you said, to kind of maximize the provider's time. Because I think that if you look at this on the surface, there are obviously threats right now to this profession, but at the end of the day, I feel as if it would be way worse if, ultimately there's just not that big of a pool of people that need your services. And on the contrary, there's a massive pool of people. And it's just a matter of figuring out how do you kind of like appeal to all those people.
Right. Right. And Jim Collins has been talking about putting the right people on the right seat of the bus, right, for many years, and really around how you run a business. But we should be designing our clinics that way as well. Put the people in the roles where they do the best work, maximize time, and maximize efficiency. And I'll be honest with you, that's where I spend a majority of my time working with ENT clinics and audiology clinics, is convincing them to let go of the things that they're not maximizing their time on, and give that to somebody that can handle that, and to focus on the things that they can do best at.
Perfectly said. Well, that's, I think, a great way to sort of bring this whole conversation full circle. So as we wrap here, Kyle, why don't you share where people can find you, connect with you, learn a little bit more about, RiseENT if they're interested in that?
Sure. And thank you again for the opportunity to come on and talk a little bit and geek out a little bit. But
this is fun.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm happy to do it again in the future.
Oh, yeah.
If need be. But if people want to learn more about RiseENT, they can go to riseent.com, or they can go to Oddconnects, AUDCONNEX.com, oddconnects.com. Or if you just want more information, want to talk to me directly, you can reach out to me at Kyle@RiseENT, RiseENT.com.
Perfect. Awesome, Kyle. Well, thanks again for coming on the show today. And thanks for everybody who tuned in here to the end. We will chat with you next time. Cheers.
Thank you.